The meeting of the Santa Monica Rent Control Board is hereby called back to order after its closed session. Please join me in the salute to our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. If anyone wishes to address the board, either on a specific item on tonight's agenda or at public comment, please see the secretary to my lower left to fill in a speaker slip. Agenda item number 4, report of closed session. Would the executive director please report on tonight's closed session?
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, Chair, Commissioners. The board met in closed session this evening at 6:05 p.m. The board adjourned with no reportable action taken. That concludes my report.
Great. Item number 5, approval of the minutes. If commissioners have had an opportunity to review the minutes of the April 10th, 2025 meeting, may I have a motion for their approval? Commissioner Leslie?
I move that we accept the minutes from our last meeting.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Leslie, seconded by Commissioner Ambrose. May we have a roll call vote, please?
Yes. Commissioner Ambrose?
Yes.
Commissioner Dudek?
Yes.
Commissioner Leslie?
Yes.
Vice Chair Ivanov?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Agenda item number 6, special agenda items. Does the executive director have anything to report to the board?
Thank you, Chair. Just one item. Santa Monica temporarily suspended enforcement of laws prohibiting short-term rentals and leases of less than 1 year to allow people displaced by the recent regional fires to find temporary places to stay. Enforcement of the city's law prohibiting short-term rentals and regulating home shares resumed on April 18th. Rules prohibiting leases for less than 1 year and leases for furnished units remain suspended until further notice, so long as units are rented to people displaced by the fires. For more information about the city's home sharing ordinance, please visit www.smgov.net/homeshare or contact the Code Enforcement Division at 310-458-4948. That concludes my comments. Thank you.
Agenda item number 7, public comment. This is the time set aside for members of the public to address the board on matters that are not included on the agenda, but that are within the board's subject matter jurisdiction. Please note that the board cannot take an official action at tonight's meeting on any matter not included on the agenda. I currently have no speaker slips. Mr. Secretary, has anyone indicated that they wish to address the board? Is there anyone who would like to address the board before we move on to the next agenda item? Seeing none, we're moving on to agenda item 10A1, jurisdictional items. This is an appeal of the hearing officer's determination that the property at 428 20th Street is not exempt under Charter Section 1815. May we have a staff report, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good evening, Commissioners. This is an appeal from the denial of an exemption application for the owners Jay and Brenda Gemarcani. They own the property at 428 20th Street, which is a single-family home. They have owned the property since 1977 and have used it exclusively as a rental property since that time. They registered it with the Rent Control Board in 1979 and paid registration fees until 1993, when they claimed to be occupying it as their principal place of residence. That turned out not to be true, and so they have not paid registration fees since then for over 30 years, even though they should have been. And then recently, they filed an application for an exemption under Section 1815. This is the section of the charter that allows an exemption if the property was not being used for residential rental purposes on July 1st, 1984. There was a dispute. The tenant currently in this property disputed that it was not used for rental purposes on that date, and so that went to a hearing. The hearing officer found that substantial evidence showed that it was more likely than not that it was being used as a rental property on that date, so she denied the exemption application. The board, in your capacity as an appellate body, is only looking at whether there is substantial evidence to support the hearing officer's decision. If you find that substantial evidence, then you're going to affirm the hearing officer's decision. Staff recommends that you do that because there is that substantial evidence. The evidence shows that the owners paid registration fees and that they've acknowledged that they have never lived on the property, and they haven't shown that it's been used for anything other than as a residential rental property. There was testimony about the various tenants who have occupied the property during these past 30 years, and that evidence has not been disputed by the owners. Given this and other evidence in the record that supports the hearing officer's decision, staff recommends that you affirm. That concludes my report, and I'm here to answer any questions, should there be any.
Thank you. Does any commissioner have any questions about the staff report? The applicants for this appeal are Jay and Brenda Jamarkani. Is there Representative H.G. Long here to address the board on this item? Yes. Great. And whenever you're ready, you'll have up to 5 minutes to speak on this item.
It's like my notes. Good evening. I'm attorney Helen Grace Long, and I'm here for the property owners, Jay and Brenda Jamarkani. I'm here because we believe that, and I hope everyone read the brief that I filed, a 13-page brief about the hearing and about everything. We argue that this decision was not supported by substantial evidence, and there was a misconstruction of the evidence, particularly relying on the deposition testimony. And from the board's, as I was sitting here listening tonight, I was to the board's recommendation, the staff, there still is no evidence that somebody lived there July 1 of 1984. I mean, it was just the argument said, because it was continuously rented, because there were renters and there was testimony of rent, that there was rental testimony, there was deposition testimony, there was no renter's testimony. But there was no evidence. So there was no affirmative evidence established whatsoever that the property was rented on July 1 of 1984. The evidentiary record is silent as to the testimony or evidence as to who, if anyone, was in possession on that date. The only source suggesting that anyone rented there was Mr. Jensen, who appealed the original exemption, who said that the Bull family was there. But this was based on a hearsay declaration that was thrown out rightfully by the officer. The hearing officer determined, and the staff determined, that the Bulls lived there in the fall of 1984. They also determined that there was a Robert Turner who lived there, but departed in late 1982. There was never a specific tenant identified on July 1 of 1984. Instead, there was a suggestion there was a short-term tenant who may have been in possession, but there was no substantial evidence. There was mischaracterization of Rick Walsh's deposition. The officer claimed that because Rick Walsh said it was always consistently rented, that the officer then determined, the hearing officer, that it was more than likely that it was rented. However, he didn't say that in his depo. And if you look at the deposition, specifically on page 12, Mr. Klein, who's sitting here, the attorney for Mr. Jensen, says, "Forgive me if I asked this before, probably in my last question, but since you moved to 1422 20th Street in 1983, do you recall any period of time other than, let's say, less than a month when there was no one living in the house?" He said, "I probably couldn't answer that. I don't know." He never said it was rented on July 1 of 1984, and he said he didn't know. The hearing officer abused her discretion by arbitrarily discrediting our witnesses, all of them. The gardener, who said he specifically remembered working on the sprinklers because he had to replace all of them. That was conveniently left out of the record. It was a major repair. The Wala Jamakari remembered working on it. The hearing officer dismissed all witness testimony on the basis there was no documentation supporting their testimony. There's no requirement of this, and it's too rigid of a mechanism to use at this hearing. To require someone to keep records from 40 years is ridiculous in anticipation of litigation. The IRS only requires 3 to 7 years. The hearing officer treated the absence of documents and the disproving of a negative as dispositive. This is flawed reasoning. There was an improper weight of the 1993 filing. The owners were transparent. They explained the filing and their misinterpretation. Let me ask you, if they were trying to perpetrate a fraud, why would they continue to file an 1815 declaration? They did so in 2016. That wasn't recent. That was 9 years ago. Why would they keep filing it? There was no litigation going on at the time. You cannot there was an issue where Mr. Jamakari said something that he was asked a question of how long the time period between Turner and the Bulls, and he said 4 to 6 weeks. However, I was there. I never heard that comment. He was confused, clearly. He's 87 years old. He had already testified multiple times it was vacant. It's clear he did not understand or hear the question. If I would have heard that, I would have had him clarify. I didn't hear him say that. But to go from that one statement, you cannot jump to the fact that it was rented when they never said so. For the supplemental report to say so is ridiculous and biased. It's not substantial evidence. The supplementary report didn't address the issue of all the witnesses who testified. And further, Dr. Jamakari's brief comment, Mrs. Jamakari's, that there were short-term rentals. She never said any of them were there on July 1. No one did. There was no evidence. I have so much. And I just would request that you overturn this based on the fact that there was no evidence. It was just inferences and speculation.
Before you step down, does any commissioner have any questions for the appellant? Okay. Oh.
No, that's all right. Go ahead.
Okay. Do we have a representative for the tenant here, Rick Klein? Good evening. You can approach the podium as well. And then did you want to use your entire 5 minutes, or did you intend to reserve anything for rebuttal time, I was told, or? Oh, gotcha, okay. Okay, so you have the entirety of your 5 minutes then, whenever you're ready.
I don't expect to use half of that, but.
Okay.
I'm going to quote from the supplemental staff report on appeal. The first issue here is, as explained in the staff report, the owners claiming an exemption have the burden to prove the facts that make them eligible for the exemption. That is the case here. The Jarmakanis and their attorneys attempt to switch the burden of proof to make my client prove that 9 years before he knew this property ever existed, that there was somebody living there on a particular day is improper. And the burden of proof remains with the applicant for the exemption. I think it's fairly outrageous that the Jarmakanis are contending that this fraudulent application that they filed in 1993, claiming that they lived at the property for a 2-year period, a continuous 2-year period from 1991 to 1993, when they didn't live in that property for even 1 day during that period. The only way we were able to disprove them was we found the person who lived there. And he came in, well, he testified by deposition. He was prepared to come in, but it wasn't necessary. At the hearing, he testified he lived there from 1987 to 1993, and that other than coming to collect the rent a couple of times, the Jarmakanis had never been in that property. Mr. Jarmakani, or Dr. Jarmakani, he's a physician. He's not an idiot. He knew what he was filling in when he filled in this very simple 1-page declaration, attesting under penalty of perjury that they lived there for a continuous 2-year period of time when they weren't there at any point during that time. The Jarmakanis also testified that they were aware of the 1815 exemption when it came into play back in 1984. But they didn't file an application then under 1815. Why? Well, because it wasn't empty on that date. They instead chose to file a perjurious declaration claiming that it was owner occupied to get an exemption of the fees. And they provided documents to the board to prove that they lived on the property, even though they didn't. They went so far as to go open a checking account that had an address of the property, and they submitted that as some proof that they lived there. I don't know that there's ever been a check written on that account. We can't find that. When I asked Dr. Jarmacani why he gave that to the board, he said he didn't give it to the board. But we got it from the board when we subpoenaed the board's records. Their claim that their fraudulent declaration in 1993 did not benefit them in any meaningful way is nonsense. They enjoyed a fee waiver for 30 years that they weren't entitled to, and more importantly, charged excessive rent, way above the maximum allowable amount. They charged rent to my client of more than $1 million over that period of time, more than the maximum allowable rent was provided for. And finally, in 2016, almost 40 years later, they made their first claim to the board that the property was exempt under Section 1815 and filed that declaration. They kept filing declarations because the board wasn't accepting them. The hearing officer found that they did not prove that they were entitled to the exemption, and found that how could they remember in 2016 something that happened 40 years ago when 30 years before that they had no recollection, even though they claim they were aware of the 1815 exemption when it was enacted. It's the Jarmacani's who made this claim about the property's rental status in 1984, in a declaration that they first filed in 2016, some 32 years later. Given that they owned this property since 1977, they could have filed this application at any time after the exemption became available, but they didn't. They didn't because the property was occupied and they knew it, and so they chose to file a perjurious declaration with the board. I submit. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Klein? Seeing none, okay. We will enter into deliberation. Commissioner Leslie?
So, what I find interesting is that from 1984 on up, there is not anything until 2016. Is that correct, as far as them trying to correct this? So what prompted them to try to correct it in 2016? Is there any record of that?
So not to correct anything, they submitted an exemption application for the first time in 2016.
Commissioner Ambrose?
Yes, in this case, which I've read and heard the both sides representatives. I feel that the hearing officer did their due diligence, and with all evidence that's been presented in this case, in our capacity as the board, our role is to determine whether or not the hearing officer his decision was supported by substantial evidence, and whether or not there was a clear error. And in this case, I do not feel that there is so, and I tend to agree. And therefore, I feel comfortable making a motion to affirm this decision. If anyone else would like to, I guess, make a more proper motion.
Before we entertain a motion, does anyone else have any just discussion or general deliberation?
Can I just add, Commissioner Ambrose, can you clarify your statements? You said the role of the board is to see if there's clear error, and you said, I think there is so. Can you, yeah.
Yes, I'm sorry. There is, the hearing officer did not err in their judgment, and therefore I feel comfortable affirming the decision and agreeing with the hearing officer's decision. Affirming. Great.
Commissioner Dudek?
I agree with what has been stated.
I would just add, I don't know where I was on July 1st, 2024. I don't know where I was on July 1st, 2021. I can't tell you where I was or what I was doing on July 1st, 2010. This notion that everybody in the record has this crystal clear recollection of where and what they were doing on July 1st, 1984 is just not credible. What appellants don't seem to understand here is that the burden rests with them in order to prevail on a Section 1815 exemption. There is no burden shifting framework here. And given that there's no written documentation and I don't find the witness testimony to be credible in support, I don't believe that the burden has been met here, so I will be voting to affirm this decision. Commissioner Ambrose has already made a motion. Is there a second?
I second the motion.
Seconded by Commissioner Dudek. May we have a roll call vote, please?
Yes. Commissioner Ambrose,
Yes.
Commissioner Dudek,
Yes.
Commissioner Leslie,
Yes.
Vice Chair Ivanov.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, moving on to agenda item 11, public hearings, 11A, status of vacancies and recruitment and retention efforts in compliance with AB 2561. The board will now hold a public hearing pursuant to the requirements of Government Code Section 3502.3 regarding the status of vacancies and recruitment and retention efforts by the agency. We will begin with a presentation from our executive director.
Thank you, Chair. We'll have a presentation come up in just a moment. There we go. Okay, so as an introduction, the purpose of this presentation is to provide an overview of current vacancy levels and recruitment and retention efforts, which is to confirm compliance with Government Code Section 3502.3. For context, Code Section 3502.3 is where AB 2561 was codified. It was enacted during the last legislative session to address the issue of job vacancies in local government, which can adversely affect the delivery of public services and employee workload. There's certain minimum reporting, and a public hearing is required prior to the adoption of an agency's budget. To note, the enhanced reporting required is not required in this case because no bargaining unit within the agency has vacancy rates exceeding 20%. So with the first slide, you see the workforce overview. As you know, we have 24 full-time positions. The core functions include public information and outreach, data management for rent-controlled housing, administration of hearings, administrative support, and legal support. Next slide, please. Our vacancy overview is we have a vacancy out of 24 authorized positions, which is a 4.2% overall vacancy rate. The breakdown by bargaining unit is Employees Action Committee has the vacancy, giving it a 7.7% vacancy rate. Hearing Officer Representation Organization, or HERO, has 0 vacancies, and the Society for Union Employment, or SUE, has 0 vacancies as well. As noted, no unit exceeds the 20% threshold requiring enhanced reporting. Next slide, please. Just some context on the, that's, how'd you get that? It's good to have a little music with my presentation. That's okay. It gets dull otherwise, so it's okay. With respect to the EAC vacancy, the lone vacancy is actually being covered by a City Information Services Department employee. They're providing additional technical support and system integration. Next slide, please. Recruitment and retention summary. Our vacancies are largely the result from retirements. They're promptly filled through the city's civil service process. We have broad recruitments that draws candidates from within the agency, the city, and the broader community. And there's really no need in staff's view for any changes to our current recruitment or retention policies at this time. Next slide, please. And so the action for this evening is to open the public hearing and hear any public or bargaining unit input, and provide any further direction if you think it's necessary. That concludes my presentation. I'm available for any questions.
The public hearing is now open. If there are any representatives from the agency's bargaining units, please approach the speaker's podium. Seeing none, the board will also now hear from the general public. Don't believe we have anyone to speak. Okay, so with public comment concluded, public hearing is closed, and the board will now begin its discussion. Does any member wish to open discussion? Commissioner Leslie?
Quick question, how do you diversify a pool?
Well, we rely on the HR department to cast a wide net for recruitments. They do so. These recruitments are published online. I know from personal experience that a lot of people apply to our positions, and it's from a broad part of the community at large when those go out to the public, and when they're internal recruitments, we also get a lot of interested candidates in the positions at the rent control agency.
Thank you.
So there's no need for a motion, correct? So, okay, great. Okay, in that case, we will move on to our next agenda item, item 12A1, is announcement of the 2025 general adjustment. May we please have a staff report?
Thank you, Chair. At this time, I will provide the 2025 annual general adjustment and outline the upcoming process regarding a potential dollar amount ceiling. Under the rent control charter, the general adjustment is set at 75% of the consumer price index increase for our region for the 12-month period ending as of March of the current year and capped at 3%. For the 12-month period ending March 2025, the CPI rose 3%. 75% of that is 2.25%, which rounds up to 2.3%. Therefore, landlords may increase rents by up to 2.3% effective September 1st, 2025, unless the board imposes a separate dollar ceiling. Per the charter, the board must hold at least one public hearing before deciding whether to impose such a ceiling. That hearing will be held at your next meeting on June 12th, 2025, at which time you'll hear from interested parties. If the board does opt to impose a ceiling, the calculated amount would be $60. This would limit the rent increase to $60 for units with current maximum allowable rents of $2,587 or more. At this time, staff recommends only that the board chair publicly announce the 2.3% adjustment. Staff does not take a position on whether a dollar ceiling should be adopted. That concludes my report.
Do any commissioners have any questions? Do any members of the public wish to address the board on this item? Does any commissioner have anything further to add? In that case, pursuant to City Charter Section 1805A, the 2025 general adjustment effective September 1st is 2.3%, subject to any dollar amount ceiling that the board may, in its discretion, separately impose. That public hearing will occur at our next regular meeting on June 12th. Moving on to item 12B1, to consider the ratification of the agency's 3 bargaining units MOUs for the period of January 1st, 2025 through June 30th, 2028, and to approve addenda to various employment agreements. May we please have a staff report?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm pleased to present for your ratification the revised memoranda of understanding between the Rent Control Board and each of our 3 bargaining units, the Employees Action Committee, EAC, the Hearing Officer Representational Organization, HERO, and the Society for Union Employment, SUE, as well as employment agreement addenda for key agency staff. These agreements are the result of thoughtful and collaborative negotiations over the last several months, and I want to begin by expressing my sincere thanks to the dedicated members of each negotiating team. From the bargaining units, Daniela Wadnicki, Eric Hernandez, Karen Evans, and Rose Patel for the EAC, Jaleesa Bolds for HERO, and Haka Mordazay for SUE. On the management side, I want to thank Allison Regan, Dan Costello, and Tracy Matty Dobb for their partnership throughout this process. I also want to recognize and thank the board for its support and for the productive meetings that Allison and I were able to have with you during the course of negotiations. The three MOUs each span a 3.5-year term from January 1st, 2025 through June 30th, 2028. This term not only reflects long-term stability, but also transitions us from calendar year contracts to fiscal year contracts, bringing us into alignment with our budget cycle and the city's internal processes. Each agreement includes important updates, such as the ability to take bereavement leave non-consecutively within a 3-month window, the addition of 2 floating holidays, and fair and phased salary adjustments. For EAC, those adjustments include a 4.5% increase beginning January 1st, 2025, and increases in July of each year of 3%, 3%, and 2%, along with in lieu payments and enhancements to longevity and promotional compensation. Hero and Sioux members will receive 2% beginning January 1st, 2025, then 3% in July of each year for the duration of the contract term. Addenda to employment agreements for our agency office coordinator and budget office coordinator provide similar structured increases. Adjustments in addenda for the general counsel, public information manager, and hearings manager align with both agency priorities and broader organizational consistency. All of these agreements have been ratified by their respective bargaining unit members or approved by the affected employees. Accordingly, I respectfully request the board authorize me to enter into the 3 MOUs presented in the staff report, along with the proposed addenda to the 5 individual employment agreements on your behalf. And finally, I want to take a moment to praise the incredible work of all of our staff. I believe that these agreements reflect the value we place in our team and the work they do every day in service of the public. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Does any commissioner have any questions about the staff report? Is there anyone who wishes to address the board on this item? Seeing none.
Before the board moves, I just want to note an error that Allison just pointed out to me on the staff report. The budget office coordinator says the first effective increase is on January 1st, 2025. That's correct, but the second 3% is effective July 1st, 2026. It should be 2025. So just for the board's knowledge, I wanted to make that correction on the record. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, we will enter deliberation. Commissioner Leslie?
Actually, that's what I would have my hand in the queue for. Thank you.
Oh, great, okay. Does anyone else have any general, before I entertain a motion, just any general deliberation? Commissioner Leslie?
I just want to say thank you for all the work that you've done to get this passed, to get this through. Thank you for the support of our staff and doing this in an equitable manner, in a quick manner as well. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to echo those comments. Thank you to both our general counsel and our executive director, especially these being for our executive director, your first labor negotiations that you've done here with the board. It's been a seamless process, so I just want to say thank you for all of your hard work. And in that case, can I get a motion?
I'm gonna, if it's okay with the board, can we do each one separately? So the staff, the sub 1, 2, and 3 of the staff report. So
Of
if
course,
someone
yeah,
could
we
make
can
those
do it that way.
motions separately, that would be great.
Page 7.
So you want to do EAC, Hero, and Sue separately?
No, just under recommended action, the first one would be ratify the attached memorandum of just, someone can move and read that language and do
Oh,
that
okay.
for each of them, and we'll take a roll call for
Okay.
each.
What page is that on?
Should be.
This is the second page of the staff report.
Oh, okay, thank you. That's number 1. Is that number 1 right there?
Commissioner Dudek?
I make a motion that we approve the ratification of the attachment memoranda of understanding with the agency's collective bargaining organizations.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Dudek, seconded by Commissioner Ambrose. May we have a roll call vote, please?
Yes. Commissioner Ambrose,
Yes.
Commissioner Dudek,
Yes.
Commissioner Leslie,
Yes.
Vice Chair Ivanov.
Yes.
Okay, motion carries.
And now somebody want to do number 2? You want to do it? Well, put yourself in the queue. Okay. Commissioner Leslie?
Okay, I make the motion that we ratify the memorandum of understanding with the,
No, number 2.
Number
I'm
2.
sorry, number 2, I'm sorry.
We did that one.
We have to say number 2?
We have to do all 3.
Yeah, I know, but
So
I
we did
was gonna
number one.
say the second,
Correct.
but that is to my understanding that it is Sue that is the second one. Is that, am I correct in?
Yes, you're going to now move the second recommendation, so you
Okay.
can read that out.
Okay. I do not have the language for that. Give me 1 second, because I don't have the language here in front of me. My apologies.
Commissioner Leslie?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your patience. I make the motion that we approve the addendum to the employment agreements of the agency office coordinator and budget office coordinator on the terms specified as thus so. Thank you. Do I have a second?
I second the motion.
Motion by Commissioner Leslie, seconded by Commissioner Dudek. May we have a roll call vote, please?
Yes. Commissioner Ambrose,
Yes.
Commissioner Dudek,
Yes.
Commissioner Leslie,
Yes.
Vice Chair Ivanov.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Commissioner Ambrose?
Well, moving to number 3, I'll go ahead and make the motion to approve the addenda of the employment agreements of the general counsel, hearings manager, and the public information manager on the terms specified. Period.
Is there a second?
I second it.
Motion by Commissioner Ambrose, seconded by Commissioner Dudek. May we have a roll call vote, please?
Yes. Commissioner Ambrose,
Yes.
Commissioner Dudek,
Yes.
Commissioner Leslie,
Yes.
Vice Chair Ivanov.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, next item, 12C1, is the third quarter budget report. May we have a staff report, please?
Thank you, Chair. And I just request if the chair is so inclined to combine C and D.
Absolutely, that would be great.
Thank you. Okay. All right. I'm pleased to be able to present to the board the third quarter budget overview, and after that, the fiscal year 2025-2026 proposed operating budget. I'm also joined this evening by our budget coordinator, Lima Noseworthy, who is also available for any questions. Both the current fiscal year and the proposed budget reflect our continued commitment to prudent financial management while ensuring high-quality services for tenants and property owners in Santa Monica. Next slide, please. Oh, wait, sorry, it's already up there. Yeah. Okay, so the third quarter budget overview. The board adopted a fiscal year 2024-2025 operating expense budget of $6,269,642. As of the end of the third quarter, total revenue is projected to be $6,205,706, which is $13,046 more than the adopted budget projection. Expenditures are projected to be $114,558 less than anticipated, resulting in a projected year-end net revenue of $50,622 instead of the $76,982 deficit that was originally expected. Major drivers of this improved outlook include savings in salaries and wages and supplies and expenses, offsetting over expenditures and capital outlay in the funded ISD position. I'm available for any questions about the third quarter budget before we move on to the proposed budget, if there are any. Okay. Next slide, please. So under the fiscal year 2025-2026 proposed operating budget. Next slide. So this is our organizational chart. Nothing much has really changed from the current fiscal year. The only difference is that instead of 4 information analysts and 2 information coordinators, a promotion opened up a information coordinator position, so now those are split evenly. Otherwise, our organizational chart remains the same. Next slide, please. So for fiscal context for the upcoming fiscal year, the total expenditures for fiscal year 2025-2026 are projected at $6,777,395. Estimated revenue for the same period is $6,524,030, resulting in a projected deficit of $253,365. The deficit is primarily due to one-time costs, including accrued leave payouts for anticipated retirements and significant office renovations. A return to surplus is anticipated in fiscal year 2026-2027. Next slide, please. The key budget drivers for fiscal year 2025-2026 are permanent employee salaries, which is $3,706,881, which includes the technical services analyst from the city's Information Services Department. Also, employee benefits of $952,416 for retirement contributions. That's 29.164% of staff salaries, and $540,781 for health, dental, and vision premiums, reflecting a 10% increase over the current fiscal year. There's also administrative indirect costs of $452,682, which is a 5.01% increase over the current fiscal year, and a capital outlay of $300,000 for office renovations to modernize the workspaces and improve functionality. Next slide, please. Regarding revenue and registration fees for the fiscal year, we're proposing a 12% increase to the annual registration fee. Sorry. $12. Did I say 12%? Let's rewind. $12, okay, to the annual registration fee, raising it from $228 to $240 per unit. The split cost for this increase is 50 cents per month per unit. That's expected to generate an additional $319,800 in revenue, and the projected total revenue for fiscal year 2025-2026 is $6,524,030, which is primarily from registration fees. Next slide, please. The expense breakdown for 2025-26, total salaries and wages is $5,455,438. That includes permanent employees, as-needed staff, and overtime. Supplies and expenses, we project would come to $960,108, including postage, printing, and service agreements. The capital outlays will be $361,850, which includes the building renovations and our IT systems, and a non-operating expense of $54,318 for the 9th of 10 annual CalPERS loan payments. Next slide, please. The reserve fund overview for the fiscal year. We always aim to maintain a reserve fund of at least 12 to 15% of the total budget each year. The projected reserves at the start of the upcoming fiscal year are approximately $1.9 million, with an end-of-year projection of approximately $1.6 million. These reserves provide a financial cushion for unexpected costs and help maintain fiscal stability. The proposed budget includes measures to rebuild reserves following significant one-time expenditures, ensuring long-term financial resilience. Next slide, please. And in conclusion, the proposed budget reflects the agency's ongoing commitment to fiscal responsibility and operational efficiency. The $12 registration fee increase is modest and necessary to address one-time costs and maintain long-term fiscal stability. Staff recommends setting the item for public hearing and adoption on June 12th. I also, just before I finish, want to thank Lima so much again for her work. It's incredible what she puts into this budget, and we couldn't do it without her, so thank you, Lima. And I or Lima are available for any questions.
Thank you. Is there anyone from the public who wishes to address the board on this item? Seeing none. I have a question. Being the lawyer that I am, I always have to ask about legal expenses.
Sure.
So I noticed that for fiscal year 25-26, the proposal is $20,000. That's higher than at any point in the last 5 years.
Actually, it's the same as what it was for the last budget.
Wait, I have fiscal year 24, 25 projected expenses.
Those are actuals.
Oh, my apologies. Okay. I was going to ask why it was increasing, if there was any expected litigation that we were preparing for or something. So it's consistent with the prior year? Okay.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Do any other commissioners have any questions? Commissioner Dudek?
Yes, the increase of $12 is modest, but I'd like to know when the last time was that the last time we had an increase.
Sure, it was 2022. It was from 198 to 228 at that time.
Thank you.
Any other questions? No? Okay, staff will place a public hearing on the June 12th agenda so that the board may consider adopting the proposed 2025-2026 operating budget. Moving on to item 12E1, a presentation from the Department of Public Works regarding electrification efforts. Before we begin, is there any member of the public who wants to be heard on this item? Seeing none, we now welcome Sustainability Analyst Nico Predak to give the present. I hope I'm not butchering your last name. Predak? Okay. Nico Predak to give the presentation.
It's not my, it's the screensaver that switches.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Oh, no, I think it's really cute. Good to go?
Whenever you're ready.
Good evening, Rent Control Board, Vice Chair and Commissioners. Not exactly sure how to address you. Can start with a quick introduction. I'm Nico Predak. I'm a Sustainability Analyst in the Office of Sustainability and the Environment, or OSE. My team works on climate and energy policies and programs, and our goal as a department is to implement actions outlined in the city's Climate Action Adaptation Plan, which was adopted by City Council in 2019. I'm also born and raised in Santa Monica and previously lived in a rent-controlled unit. And today I'm here to provide you an update on Santa Monica's Building Performance Standards, which is a policy targeting carbon reductions and energy improvements in the city's large existing buildings. So in today's presentation, we'll define what building performance standards are. We'll cover the city's policy development process over the last 2 years, and we'll review the actual policy as it stands currently, and then go over next steps for eventual implementation and our current activities for community engagement. So to establish the definition of what building performance standards are, Institute of Market Transformation defines a BPS policy, and I'll refer to building performance standards as BPS throughout, as a set of mandatory requirements for existing buildings designed to decarbonize buildings and the economy by reducing energy, gas, and water use and cutting peak electric demand. They're different from and they complement building codes because they apply at specified dates, whether or not a building is pulling building permits, and they require progressively better performance over time. So they drive improvements across a broad swath of large buildings. This is a useful visual for how building performance standards work, specifically with a trajectory approach where a final performance target is established, and in every compliance cycle, the building or building type needs to meet interim performance targets. And typically these targets are established from a baseline year using aggregate energy data over 1 or multiple years averaged out. And baseline performance is established using benchmarking data, typically. This is a map of building performance standards policies that have been adopted across the US with a concentration on the East Coast and state policies that have been adopted in Maryland, Colorado, and Oregon. The only jurisdiction to have adopted building performance standards in California is Chula Vista, but there are many others that are committed to adopting BPS policies, as this map displays. So this shows both jurisdictions that have passed building performance standards and jurisdictions that have joined the National Building Performance Standards Coalition and are committed to passing BPS policies by Earth Day of 2026. You can see a much larger concentration in California there, including Los Angeles City and County, City of West Hollywood, some Bay Area cities, and the state of California. And this map displays the national momentum towards adopting building performance standards. To put building performance standards in context, we can look at an active and recently adopted policy in Seattle, Washington. The City of Seattle adopted its BEPS ordinance in 2023. It stands for Building Emissions Performance Standards. The policy applies to commercial and multifamily buildings that are larger than 20,000 square feet. The performance metric Seattle chose is a greenhouse gas emissions intensity, which is expressed as kilograms of CO2 per square foot per year. Performance metrics are the central part of a building performance standards policy because they represent what you're trying to regulate in the building. And Seattle chose a GHGI metric because it is in line with their broader climate action goals. Seattle's targets are set by building activity type, and buildings are required to reduce greenhouse gas intensity of covered buildings to meet these targets over time. And as a final performance target, buildings are required to meet net zero between 2041 and 2050 and must maintain net zero emissions thereafter. There are 5-year compliance cycles in between the baseline and final performance target, which are the interim targets, the first one being in 2031. To be in compliance with the policy, covered buildings must either A, meet the building performance target through any means necessary or reasonable for the building owner, or B, building owners can submit alternative compliance payments in lieu of meeting the target, which are based on square footage or through prescriptive upgrades like electrification, or option C, buildings can apply for a flexible pathway depending on if they qualify. For enforcement, Seattle structured penalties based on building size and failure to report. And then it's not listed here, but Seattle also exempted industrial buildings and all electric buildings. So I'm hoping that provided some background on building performance standards generally, what they are. Now I'm going to dive a little deeper into the work we've been doing in our office and at the city to develop building performance standards. So for some background, within the city's climate action adaptation plan, the broad goals are to reduce citywide emissions to 80% below 1990 levels by 2030, reduce fossil fuel use in existing buildings by 20% by 2030, and to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050 or sooner. Emissions from the building sector in Santa Monica currently contribute to 33% of total citywide emissions, so pretty significant chunk. And then also South Coast Air Quality Management District recently adopted rulings such as 1146.2 that introduce zero NOx requirements for water and space heating in existing buildings. And these will basically phase in for different building types and sizes over the coming years and will require electrification of those end uses for space and water heating. In the building sector, there are some major benefits to electrifying and improving energy efficiency, including reduced indoor air pollution, environmental benefits, and in many cases, lowered utility bill costs. Building performance standards were listed in our climate action adaptation plan, which was adopted by City Council in 2019 and has a high priority measure to achieve CAP goals. We also recently adopted the Energy Performance Approach REACH code, requiring new buildings to either be highly efficient mixed fuel or all electric. So this is happening for new construction. New buildings are, more and more high performance each year, so it's time to do the same and bring these same benefits to existing buildings. A while back, we conducted a building performance standards impact analysis. This figure shows the potential building sector emissions reductions from achieving net zero for various building sizes. And we determined that covered buildings greater than 20,000 square feet would result in the highest amount of carbon reductions while impacting the smallest number of buildings. And that's why we went with that threshold. This figure kind of just helps paint a helpful picture to show that implementing a BPS policy would result in an 82% reduction in building sector emissions from 1990 levels, which is pretty significant. This is our current BPS timeline. About 2 years ago, we began conducting workshops with a range of technical stakeholders to begin developing the BPS policy. Through that, it was recommended that we engage more property owners or representatives of covered buildings from real estate, construction, facilities, and management side of buildings. We then formed a Building Performance Standards Working Group and hosted 6 working group meetings focused on developing different aspects of the policy. And then throughout the policy development process, we consulted with other jurisdictions who implemented building performance standards. We participated in the National Building Performance Standards Technical Assistance Network, and multiple iterations of analysis were conducted by the national labs. We developed a covered buildings list, so we identified all the buildings that are greater than 20,000 square feet. And we're currently in the process of finalizing a draft ordinance, which we will release for public comment next month. And as part of our community engagement process, we're hosting informational meetings as an opportunity to engage BPS stakeholders prior to bringing the policy to Santa Monica City Council on August 26th of this year. Things are subject to change, but that's what we're currently penciled in for. Following adoption, we'll begin the rulemaking process, and we'll continue to work with stakeholders to develop the BPS. I'll detail this a bit more in a moment, but our goal is basically to adopt the ordinance, which will authorize our department to draft rules and regulations governing the ordinance. And the rulemaking process is expected to last a little under a year, with the policy going into effect in June of 2026. Once the policy does go into effect, benchmarking will be required annually for all buildings under 20,000 or over 20,000 square feet, and buildings greater than 50,000 square feet will be required to meet the first performance target by 2031. And then, in alignment with our climate action plan, all covered buildings will need to meet net zero emissions by 2050 as the final performance target. So to cover Santa Monica's BPS policy in a nutshell, I'll lay it out the same way I walk through Seattle's policy. We're calling it the Clean and Healthy Existing Buildings Ordinance at the moment. Same as Seattle, we're aiming to cover commercial and multifamily buildings greater than 20,000 square feet under the policy. We're focusing on a greenhouse gas emissions intensity metric. So once again, that's emissions per square foot, and that's given our climate action goals as well. And have yet to determine whether site energy use intensity will also be included as a metric. And for reference, that is energy use per square foot as opposed to emissions. To comply with the policy, building owners will be required to reduce greenhouse gas emissions for each compliance cycle, and targets will be determined by property type, and the final performance standard, as mentioned earlier, will be set as net zero by 2050. Compliance cycles will be on 5-year intervals, with the first target being in 2031 for buildings larger than 50,000 square feet, and 2036 for buildings larger than 20,000 square feet. To comply, building owners will be given the option to either meet performance targets through necessary and reasonable upgrades, so just meet the performance standards, or through a flexible building performance action plan process. Building performance action plans are agreements between the city and the property owner that provide additional flexibility to building owners facing challenges in meeting performance standards, whether that's for financial reasons relating to building logistics or other reasons. And then non-compliance penalties will be structured based on the social cost of carbon if buildings fail to meet the targets, and flat fines will be imposed if buildings fail to report. We don't have the exact numbers for what the penalties would be yet. We're planning on figuring that out in our rulemaking stage. Speaking of rulemaking, I want to make the focus on making the distinction between the ordinance and the rules and regulations. After ordinance is adopted, there will be about 9 months to draft the rules. For some examples, the ordinance will contain high-level details on benchmarking, schedules for performance standards, building performance action plans, exemptions, and the city's authority to enforce the policy. And then many details, I'm only including a few here as an example, will be contained in the rules and regulations post-adoption. I want to underscore that we're planning on structuring a technical committee to participate in the rulemaking process. This would ideally be composed of owners of covered buildings as well as other local stakeholders. But the rules and regulations will contain a lot more details related to performance metrics, the actual standards property will be required to meet, structured penalties and alternative compliance payments, building performance action plans, and methodology for determining baseline performance. And then once again, the rulemaking process will really be a key period for building owners to work directly with the city to co-develop the policy. So what might building performance standards policy look like in practice for an individual building? Want to give a disclaimer that this is a broad example, but let's take a building that's larger than 20,000 square feet in Santa Monica. We can use 2450 Colorado as an example. First, building owners will report energy and building data annually through Energy Star Portfolio Manager as part of the benchmarking requirement. Once baseline performance is established using benchmarking data, buildings will have a time frame within which they can take action to reduce energy use, improve energy efficiency, or electrify in order to meet the performance targets. Once those interim performance targets are met, they must be maintained. If building owners are unable to meet targets, they can submit a building performance action plan to develop a flexible compliance path. I know I've left a lot of details out here, but figured it would be helpful to give the high-level picture in practice. I didn't mention exemptions in the policy overview slide, but wanted to list the exempt building types or scenarios in Santa Monica's policy. These include industrial buildings, federal government, buildings with no certificate of occupancy during required reporting timeframe or less than 50% occupancy, a building with a demolition permit, buildings experiencing qualifying financial distress. We're working on those definitions right now. Single-family homes and all-electric buildings. Pending policy adoption, our office is thinking through the best ways to build out the program to support building owners in complying and offering additional resources. A good BPS program relies on strong software to support the building performance database, which is the centralized location for program management and the place where the city will interact with building owners, tell them when they're in compliance, tell them when they're not, tell them what they need to do to get in compliance. We intend to create a BPS support help desk as well. We have internal funding to do so. And that'll include various resources on building owner support, including funding and financing guidance, how to apply, and how to navigate the rebate and incentive landscape. We also intend to create an Equity Priority Buildings Program or an EPB program, which will provide additional assistance in potentially funding for buildings that qualify as equity priority, depending on a number of factors, one of those most likely being rent controlled. A FAQ sheet was distributed in the agenda packet. I believe it goes into a lot more detail about this, but I wanted to highlight a few relevant points on how rent-controlled buildings would potentially be impacted, why I'm speaking about this to you guys tonight. A while back, we requested information on the number of buildings, and our assumption was that buildings with more than 25 units are probably greater than 20,000 square feet and are likely covered under the policy. And we identified a total of 126 rent-controlled properties. This is out of a total of 762 buildings. The FAQ sheet contains more information on this stuff as well related to tenant protections, but there are many in place when buildings do need to make upgrades. There are currently no allowable pass-throughs. MAR is limited, and there are benefits given if and when tenants do need to be relocated or are displaced due to upgrades. This should be rare. The fact of the matter is that many of these buildings will need to upgrade their systems at some point anyways. Gas, HVAC and water heating systems are faulty and they have lifetimes. And the incremental cost of replacing gas systems for electric is often minimal. There are a variety of existing rebate and incentive programs in place as well, some of which are listed in the FAQ. I've also mentioned building performance action plans where buildings can submit a plan to meet targets on their own terms. If they're unable to reasonably meet the targets. And this is a really key piece to give building owners more flexibility in complying. All right, wrapping this thing up soon. In terms of our next steps, we are hosting informational meetings during April, May, and we have one more coming up in June. So if you know of anyone that you think information pertaining to Santa Monica's BPS would be relevant to, please feel free to point them in the direction of our office. We've done a lot of outreach, have engaged many building owners. We are struggling to engage more building owners on the rent-controlled building side of things. We have contacts that we've reached out to. It's just been kind of tricky to get them on the line. But once initial policy language is developed, we're planning on having a period of public comment before presenting the policy to City Council. The draft ordinance will likely be released at the end of at the middle of next month. Also, before the council meeting, we are presenting two other commissions. I recently delivered a presentation to the Building and Fire Life Safety Commission, and they were fully in support of the policy. We're also presenting this to the Sustainability Commission next week. And then, yeah, as mentioned, our adoption target is August of this year. And then once the BPS is adopted, we will begin the rulemaking process where those specific details of the standards will be written into law. And then lastly, I'd like to highlight the opportunities that we're providing for the public to get involved prior to the August council date. We have the remaining public info meeting in June. The second one actually took place earlier today. I got some great feedback from the public. We released a policy landing page on the city website, which includes a public comment survey. I think that was provided to you as well, but if not, I'm happy to follow up. And we're also planning on including a draft of the ordinance for public comment next month once it's finalized on that webpage. And we'll be doing some communications around that too. So that's all I've got. Sorry for the long presentation, but feel free to ask any questions.
Before I open the floor up for questions, I just want to say, I think on behalf of all of us, thank you so much for taking time out of your Thursday night to give this presentation. It was very thorough and comprehensive, so we really appreciate it. Does anyone want to kick off the questioning? Commissioner Dudek? No. Oh, Commissioner Leslie?
So thank you for your presentation. I just had a couple of questions.
Sure.
As far as your public meetings, where have you been conducting those?
We've been hosting those virtually online. So,
Okay.
yeah, we've been posting links to the meetings through our newsletter, through the city's newsletter, through socials, and then on the website we just launched. And then we've been doing direct outreach to any of the email and phone number contacts we've been able to get through our covered buildings list.
Have you had any in-person meetings?
Not recently, no.
Okay, something to consider for our older population. And how do you decipher who to contact?
For the public to get
Yes, for the public.
attendees for the public meetings. We have contacts that we've identified through the covered buildings list. Some of them are emails, some of them are phone numbers. We have worked with Community Corporation directly. And other than that, it's kind of just generally through word of mouth.
Well, of course, as you would have guessed, once that we got the notification that you were going to come is on our agenda, we start receiving emails from different property owners. And how do you, when you say compensation, how are people compensated as far as the conversion process? How long does that usually take?
Can you explain what you mean by?
Like converting from gas to electric for a building, like for the small mom and pop landlords, how long do you estimate that kind of process would take?
Like how long would the project take? Or
Yes, as far as conversion.
So it depends. There's a table in the FAQs that lists for different project types, how long the construction process takes. So if you're replacing wall insulation, that can take up to a few weeks. But most of these projects we anticipate to be fuel switching projects, so switching out gas water heaters for electric, switching out HVAC systems for electric. Water heaters are very short, couple hours a day. Space heating systems can be longer sometimes, a few days at most. So yeah, I hope that helps answer your question.
Thank you. Pass it.
I just had a few questions. So you had a map where I think you showed there's only been like a few states around the country that have adopted like a BPS policy statewide.
Yeah.
I think you alluded to the fact that you've already like done some working groups like in the past with other stakeholders in this area. But are you guys, or is your office like still working with, people from these jurisdictions like currently as you're drafting this policy to figure out, because I assume like, if they pass it, it's been in effect for however many years now. And obviously like some things are working, some things are not working. So maybe if you guys are collaborating with them, like that would be helpful to find out like what's working, what's not, and apply that here.
Absolutely, yeah. That's been our biggest point of learning is talking with other jurisdictions. So talking with jurisdictions that have adopted, we've been working closely with Denver, Seattle, Washington, D.C. We've talked with folks from Boston and New York as well, and Chula Vista. We have a whole list of what has worked, what hasn't. To sum that up would take a while and would take a lot of
Yeah,
memory
yeah.
jogging, but regionally, we're at a very similar stage as West Hollywood, which Jonathan is very familiar with. So we're collaborating with them actively. We're also participating in a statewide cohort led by U.S. Green Building Council California. It's called the Cal BPS cohort, and they convene regional stakeholders and jurisdictions on a monthly basis to kind of go through different aspects of building performance standards and talk about how to develop a policy. But in terms of the jurisdictions that are actively working on policy development, it's a few Bay Area jurisdictions, Santa Monica and City of West Hollywood, that are kind of leading the pack.
And I'm just curious if you know this because it's your field. I wouldn't expect you to be responsible for this by any stretch, but do you know if there's like, because I see Oregon and Washington are on the map, and California isn't, is there a statewide effort to get California in line with BPS with other jurisdictions? Or do you know, is there one kind of in the works?
There is. So this map is green is past BPS, blue is committed to passage of BPS. SB 48 is the state's BPS legislation. Right now, the CEC, California Energy Commission, is working on a report detailing building performance standards. So it's in the works right now, and we've been collaborating with the state too. They're hosting working group meetings that we've been going to.
Gotcha. And my last question was just, so let's say hypothetically you guys present this to the council in August. Let's say the council passes this, late this year. I appreciate that the language is still in the works, so I know you guys are still drafting the ordinance. I think my question is more about like the enforcement mechanism. So I think I saw in your presentation, it said something about like annual benchmark reporting. I guess my questions are like, what agency or what office within the city is responsible for enforcement or kind of monitoring those benchmarks? And if, let's say, a building or a property owner is, found to be not in compliance, are we looking at fines? Like, what's the enforcement mechanism that is being like thought out at this point?
Yeah, exactly. So that would be our Office of Sustainability and the Environment would oversee compliance. And there are kind of two ways in which fines or fees would be imposed. One is failure to report, and we anticipate coming up with a flat fine. We don't know the exact amount.
Sure.
For failure to report. And then there's failure to meet the target. So by a certain target date, we're planning on structuring the fine for failure to meet target based on magnitude of noncompliance. So how far off the building is from meeting its target will result in a higher fine versus if they're close to meeting the target, it'll be less of a fine. Other jurisdictions have structured enforcement and penalties differently. Some for building square footage. If you're a larger building with higher square footage, you might impose a higher fine for not meeting the target. But we found in other jurisdictions that magnitude of noncompliance is the way to go.
Gotcha. Thank you. Commissioner Dudek?
Yeah, so you said this applies to buildings 20,000 square feet and more.
That's right, yeah.
So that means it wouldn't apply to the smaller units. They would not fall under the requirement. And it sounds as though you're already working with other cities and agencies and so on. Have you been working with landlords? Are they aware of all the, here in Santa Monica, and how is that going?
Yes, that's been our probably our trickiest point is identifying actual landlords to talk to. As you guys know, most landlords are owners of the smaller mom and pop. There are landlords for the larger buildings. Obviously, it's a very small number of buildings. But we have communicated with the mom and pop owners, and you make the point about this applying to large buildings. We're working on developing a separate policy. It's in the much earlier stages, but that would focus on smaller single and multifamily buildings as well. And through kind of like our early outreach, we've spoken with AGLA, We've spoken with folks at SMER and other groups to help identify some of those mom and pop landlords. So we've spoken with them, but doesn't pertain to them as much. The building performance standard doesn't pertain to them as much.
And where is the funding coming from?
To support the program, we currently have internal budget, but in terms of actual property owners making upgrades, that is their responsibility, and we're going to function as a body to help identify rebates, incentives, financing opportunities, and a lot of the really awesome available mechanisms there are for building owners to be able to afford these upgrades.
So in some cases, it would require displacement of tenants in some cases?
Temporary displacement, and that would be very rare in our understanding.
Thank you.
Okay, I think that's it with questions. Any comments or general thoughts? Commissioner Ambrose?
Yeah, no questions, just some comments. So first, thank you so much for your presentation. I found it very detailed yet digestible, so thank you for that, even though it's a very nuanced issue. And, personally, I'm very dedicated to environmental causes. My husband is an environmental attorney, so I think it's an important issue. Overall, I think it's great that there's a commitment to adopt these standards, that there's so many other cities that have made this commitment by, I think you said Earth Day 2026.
Yeah.
West Hollywood and the city of LA, and then we have some sort of relationship, having two of our staff that have had a connection with them. And also I think with Santa Monica, that, we are a progressive city, and, when this is coming, we're talking about an environmental issue. I think that this is something that we should really stand for. I found these slides with the maps very interesting. I know that maps can sometimes, show things in different ways, but I found this kind of interesting, that, I don't know if you can go back and forth, but, just the way that I saw it, that, we're not on it, and that some cities are making commitments, and I think that we should be one of them, of course. And, that we are a local city, Santa Monica, and that Chula Vista has done this, and they're, I believe, a city in the San Diego County. So, and we are a city in Los Angeles County. Let me see. Anything else? And also, I think that I'm confident in our very competent staff, and I'm just looking forward to seeing these important changes. So thank you very much.
Thank you. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate it. Happy to hear the support.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. Oh, you had more questions? Oh, sorry. I jumped the gun a little bit.
I just had a quick question as far as how do you get the property owners to buy into this?
Property owners, there are a couple points here. I mentioned briefly that a lot of these upgrades can bring tenant benefits. Property owners want to attract tenants to rent units. And these upgrades increase asset value of existing buildings. So when you make a resilient upgrade like switching a gas water heater to electric, it increases the overall property value.
Okay. So, I'm asking these questions in regards to some of the concerns that, like the emails that we got once they found out you were coming. So I just wanted to kind of impress upon you, like as far as trying to help you expand outreach so that they won't have these concerns, they can get all their questions answered.
Absolutely.
And also to take into account that maybe somewhere in the future soon that you could have an in-person meeting. Okay?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for the recommendations.
All right, now you're actually off the hook. Okay, moving to item 16, adjournments. Can I have a motion to adjourn the meeting to the next regular meeting of the Santa Monica Rent Control Board on June 12th, 2025? All in favor? Oh, please, okay.
Just remind the board that we're having, a seminar, May 22nd.
May what?
May
22nd. So there's two seminars on May 22nd in the main public library for property owners at, 10:30 to 12:30, and tenants from 6 to.
Oh, you said May 22nd?
Yeah.
Is that the
You sure
101?
you don't want to come up to this friendly mic here so everybody can hear you online?
That's an
Yes,
important
please.
announcement.
Bring your lovely
I'm just
self
saying.
right on.
Morning. So thank you so much for sharing that information.
Thank you. Okay, all in favor on a motion to adjourn?
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
I love